Welcome YouTube, it's Chobra, and today I want to talk a little bit about the philosophy of how to analyze teams in Valorant, right? Professional teams, and more than just analyzing, how to rate teams in Valorant. Now, this isn't about necessarily like power rankings or predictions, because that all has its own place. But the recent discussions after Masters Bangkok about, okay, so is T1 actually the best team in the world versus some people out there considering G2 is still the best team in the world. And I get where they're coming from, right? Like, I oftentimes actually look at Valorant in a similar way where I'm like, yeah, but the core consistency and the floor and all of that, I think, or just the sound analysis idea or the game theory of this team seems to be better. I get what they're trying to say, but it sparked a lot of discussion, and I wondered myself, is there any actual merit to that, or should we start to think about this a little bit differently? Now, what this is going to pertain to is the concept of forced and unforced errors. Those of you who watch tennis will know this, and I'm just going to put a disclaimer out there. I haven't actually watched or followed tennis in a long time, but I used to enjoy playing and watching tennis when I was younger. And it actually was very interesting to me that tennis likes to talk about forced versus unforced errors. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the terms, they are basically as they sound. Forced errors are when one player is able to force the opponent to make a mistake or, to not be able to rally back. And so it's a way where you tell them that they are going to have to do the absolute best to prevent losing a point, but otherwise they're going to lose the point. So maybe this is something like, you hit it in a very, very hard spot for them to reach. They could have reached it physically, absolutely, but it would have had to be perfect, or, a spin on it, or the power of your shot is so strong where they could have returned it if they were just a bit better prepared, and they technically could have, but it was very hard for them to do so, and they either missed the shot or it goes out of court or whatever. So that is the idea of a forced error. Now, on the flip side, what is an unforced error? Well, an unforced error is basically your typical mistake. This is the one player just making their own mistake. They weren't put under any type of situation where it got suddenly infinitely harder for them to do. And so this is something like, in tennis, let's say the ball's coming, at a very good angle. It's not that fast. You should have just been able to do a very, very casual, forehand swing or whatever. And for whatever reason, maybe you were greeting it, or maybe, I don't know, you're not experienced enough and you got nervous. Whatever reason, you make the mistake. You hit it out of the court, or you whiff, or whatever else it might be. That's on you, right? That's just your own mistake. So unforced errors are mistakes, whereas forced errors are, okay, I give credit to you. Like I should, if I want to win, I should be able to return that. But at the same time, like, you made it so hard. Now, of course, there is a third category of points where, like, it was impossible for you to return the point. And so the other person just wins, that rally. And that happens too. There's no error committed. The other person was just better in that round, so to speak. So how does this pertain to Valorant, right? Forced versus unforced errors in an FPS. Well, there's a lot of different ways to think about it, but let's just kind of outline what we're talking about here. So obviously in Valorant, we oftentimes, a lot of us analysts like to talk about the micro versus the macro. And so I got to make sure my camera is not covering this for you guys. But the micro is basically individual play, right? Your movement, your util, your lineup, the accuracy, your aim, things like that. The macro is generally map movement and strategy, right? So this is things like, are you pushing and pulling across the map? Do you have good baits and, whatnot? Do you have good round-to-round reads? Now, the macro is a bit more loosely interpreted, I think, but when it comes to micro, and even things like, let's say, trading for each other, how quickly you do that, your spacing, all of that would be micro things, where it's not necessarily the strategy, but it's about the execution of it and how well it's done. And this is where forced and unforced errors can be classified a bit better. So an unforced error here, as you find out how terrible my handwriting is, an unforced error here can mean something like just a straight up whiff. You whiff and you die into a death, right? Because if you don't die, like, there is technically a consideration that it's a mistake, but when we're talking about errors, it has to result in something. It has to have impact. Now, if you whiffed and that allowed them to take space, eventually they take the round. I mean, yes, that's probably an error as well, but a whiff into a death, right? You whiff, they shoot you back. That's a very, very clear micro unforced error. Another unforced error could be, something like you line up, right? you line up and you give them a collateral. And that would be an unforced error, right? No one forced you to do that. Like, you just simply peek out, but you're not spaced out, and you get collat by the operator. That's an unforced error. Now, then what would be a forced error? Well, let's take a look at similar situations as the above. A forced error, in terms of the whiff, would be something like you get a relay bolt flying your way, right? A relay bolt is coming your way, and so you have to move out. And so either you're moving or you're stunned, so your aim is now harder. It's still possible for you to get that kill. It is still possible for you to win that. And it would be a great feat, but it's possible. It's not like a miracle. It doesn't require timing and luck, right? It's not like a smoke spam. I'm not saying that that's luck, but there is a differentiation there where if you're having to move out, like, you could have still maybe just stutter steps just enough, or maybe, you're stunned, but you were still used to it, where you're able to keep your crosshairs trained and you get that kill. So there is a world where you could have done this without, luck and timing involved, and just kind of like a good gut feeling, but it was hard, right? You were forced out of that position. You were forced into an uncomfortable spot. Same thing with the lineup. I mean, maybe the salvos are coming in. So the salvos come in, and now you have to both, right, move out of the way together. If you got like salvos happening here, both of you are now moving this way, and then there's an operator that shoots you, and you are both dead at the same time. So that would be one where it's like, okay, you were forced to do that. Yes, in a very ideal world, maybe you still had a way to like space yourselves out or whatever. So it's not entirely impossible, but you were forced out. Now, when it comes to the macro, there are some loose areas here, but I'll just give some glaring examples. So an unforced error would be something like you just never went out for information. You're playing scared and you never got any information, so no info. You're just waiting, and then you just say, okay, like 5 stack all in, and then you run into a bunch of traps and whatnot, and you lose the round. Okay, like that's bad, right? Now, a forced error would be something like they threw a fake and you bit it. Okay, well, I mean, you were kind of forced into thinking that that was the right choice because the opponents threw a fake and baited you into that. Now, the macro gets complicated because now there's things like, okay, well, like something that happened at the beginning of the round or round to round and things like that. So there's a lot more to consider there. But I think the micro is pretty clear. Now, we do just want to talk about one last part of this, which is, of course, the last part, which is, okay, well, what about the times there are no errors? There's a very good example of there's no error here. The other team was just better in that specific execution. All right. So we're about to take a look at one of the rounds from Abyss between G2 and T1 at Masters Bangkok. Some of you will immediately recognize what we're about to watch here. But there are things to consider. Trust me, and this matters. So G2 has now grouped up over on the A side. T1 has correctly eventually started to make the rotations over, and 3 people are already here. A smoke comes out from T1, and Leaf is going to try to start to get ahead of it. But now a Seize comes in front of the smoke, right? So it's not in the smoke. This is T1 just saying, okay, we want to just delay them as much as possible. So smoke and the Seize in front, if they try to get ahead of it, they would have been caught. I mean, maybe it's a bit of a miss as well, but either case, Seize comes in, seizes 2 people, and then the salvos come out. All right, so if you look at the radius here, there's nowhere for Leaf and Trent to go. They could not have responded to this other than not getting hit by it in the first place. So this is credit to T1 on having a very good timing, whereas Trent and Leaf, the moment it happened, there was no way for them to like get out of it or get kills before they die or whatnot, because T1's not peeking. If you look at the minimap, they're all hiding away, and Trent and Leaf just have to die. So this is not an error on their end. Again, on a macro level, like if you want to argue, oh, they didn't draw out the util, so that is technically not the cleanest play, sure. But I think there's also a bit of there's stylistic choices there on like teams that like to play aggressive and teams that like to play passive. So I think you have to give credit where this is just, I mean, Leaf and Trent, they were just screwed. There's not much they can do there. So they will fall and things get a little bit messy, right? And so Jogmo just bails out. Now it's all down to Jogmo. So let's Talk about this step by step. First of all, they don't have any guns. So T1's scrambling forward to try to pick up guns. And we're going to see Izu pick up one. He throws it over to Sylvan. And Sylvan barely just picks it up. Now, that does put them at a position where they're not already in position to just fight against Jagamo. But consider this in slow motion. Sylvan peeks back out because he just thinks he has a timing on a 1v1. He actually fires shots, but he's not able to land it. Now, credit to Jagamo, he's got some good sidestepping going on. So it's not entirely just a complete whiff from Sylvan, but it is a bit, I would say, of an unforced error because he didn't land the first shot. And then he pays for it. So that, all right, we'll say that that's an unforced error. He goes down. Izu was already on the swing out to try to trade for him. It's a little bit late. He starts backing back out, but now he's in no man's land, and he doesn't land the first shot. Now, again, some credit to Jagamo where he is swinging back out. So you could argue it's a bit forced, but to me, in Valorant, this doesn't really count as a forced error. It's an unforced error because also Izu simply should have just not been taking this fight, or he should have been with Sylvan much earlier. So Izu is going to go down, and then that's 2 unforced errors. And so now Meteor tries to go for the kill, and they hear the reload, so they're considering it, but they say, you know what, just whoa, let's just back up. Let's back it up, right? So that's the same thing Izu could have done. But watch what happens here, because I thought this was very, very well done, even when I was watching this live, and people were like, I mean, you know, he just swung out and they just didn't kill him. But if you watch it in slow motion, this gate crash actually 100% matters. So he fakes the gate crash. Until this point, they are both watching. They're spaced out. They're both watching. They're ready to absolutely get the kill. They're still watching, but this, you don't see it. You kind of see it right behind on the scoreboard. This gate crash is like still popping, right? It's in the process. The animation and sound are going through. And look at Meteor. He gets baited by the gate crash. He turns his head to just check. He's like, whoa, wait, what? Like on our screen, because we're playing it in slow-mo, we're like, dude, he was on your screen. But in Meteor's screen live, he's like watching. And as he's choosing to turn, Jagamo shows up. So in this world, in this setup, that is a forced error because he takes away Meteor's attention. Now, if you really want to nitpick, it's like, well, Buzz didn't land the first shot, so it's kind of like a unforced error from Buzz, but sure. But basically, it's a 2v1, and Jagamo breaks the 2v1 by just for one literal half second pulling away Meteor's sights to his fake gate crash, and then he wins the 1v2. So that's a forced error. So it starts in a 1v4. Unforced error, still numbers advantage, not complete weapon advantage. But then Jagamo forces an error and he clutches it up. And I think that means a lot, right? I think that means a lot because that's what we would like to call X factor, is that you're able to force them into errors. Maybe it's just by aura. Sometimes it's because of utility like this. But this one was very well executed. So that's just one short example. But again, in the heat of the moment, it can seem simply like, oh, well, they didn't play together, so it's absolutely just, they just totally goofed it up. But also that very last part where T1 still had a chance, now you got to give credit to Jagamo for forcing that error out of it. It's still an error, right? This is where you want to be careful because it's not that Jagamo just made it impossible for them to win. It's still an error on T1's part, but now Jagamo was the one who should get some credit for that. Whereas the beginning too, it's like, all right, T1, you did mess it up. And yeah, you know, that snowballs out. And if that didn't happen, they wouldn't have even been in that situation anyway for the fake to work. So I get that. So obviously, especially in a team game, it's a little harder to keep this stricter. And even in tennis, I think sometimes it's a little bit, there's some contention over how do you define that line. But I do think it's interesting to look at if you ever want to think, okay, was this one team playing poorly or was it the other team playing better, right? A lot of games, we often think about that question. And if you start to look at each action as, was it an error to begin with? And if it was it forced or unforced? I think you start to get a clearer picture and you start to see, okay, what can I expect in terms of consistency from each of these teams? I just wanted to get that idea out there. There's a much deeper discussion to be had about this, but I think it's going to be good for a lot of people to start just considering this even in passing when you're watching these matches as stage one kicks off, to start to have a better gauge of, okay, who's actually playing better, who's actually playing to their own strengths, whereas who's actually maybe fumbling even though they have the potential. And so maybe that just means that they're inconsistent. If you're curious on what that might look like for a full game, we do have a membership video where I go through the Pearl match, the last map between T1 and G2, under our YouTube membership or over on my Patreon. So I'll have the link for the Patreon down in the description as well, but go check that out if you want. You'll just have to subscribe to the monthly content. And the idea is in the future, kind of monthly, I'll be able to do these deeper dives where I expand on a concept or an analysis a little bit more for our members. So if you're interested in that, your support would be much appreciated. But that's going to be it for this one. Obviously, VCT Pacific Stage 1 kicks off very soon, and Nongshim Red Force is going to be playing on the third day for VCT Pacific on the Monday, as VCT Pacific is going to have 3-day weekends for matches. So make sure you mark your calendars for that one, because if they can win that one versus ORQ, it's going to be a very, very good start. But I will be watch partying all the matches, so you can catch me live over the weekend, both here on YouTube and over on Twitch. Hope you guys enjoyed this food for thought, and I will see you on the next one. Have a good one.